When I was growing up in a Western Pennsylvania Presbyterian manse, for those of you who don't know what a manse is, it's a term used for a church-owned house where the pastor and his family lived. Sunday was exclusively reserved for church and Sunday school on Sunday morning and youth group activities on Sunday night, otherwise known as Westminster Fellowship. Any time between those hours was reserved for family activities, Sunday dinner, rides in the car, reading the newspaper, and so on. There was no playing catch in the front yard. There were no chores to be done. No going down to the ball field to play ball with your friends. It was a challenge for my parents to keep 4 active boys crowd every Sunday afternoon. And I know we tried to figure out many ways to circumvent the system. But later on in life, my father especially liberalized his thinking about activity on the Sabbath. He started going to a few professional sporting events on Sunday afternoon, was not disinclined to have an occasional golf game on Sunday afternoon, or even do a little shopping with my mother on Sunday afternoon. I think he realized that the unwritten Sunday laws of what was once called the United Presbyterian Church of North America were unnecessary and unrelated to the message and to the spirit of Christianity. They weren't necessarily laws without love, but laws without purpose. Laws without love, laws without purpose. Jesus saw both in the Luke lessons today read by Jan. Those of you who might not know or are visiting today, we're going through the Gospel of Luke this spring semester, and our passages today highlight the antagonism between the Pharisees, the keepers of the law in the Jewish tradition, and Jesus, the examiner of the law and its usefulness. Jesus saw no usefulness in the law which prevented the disciples from picking wheat in the wheat fields on the Sabbath when they were hungry. But probably the greatest alarm came when Jesus said, "The Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath," meaning that Jesus himself gave the orders about the Sabbath, not the stick-in-the-mud Pharisees, whose rationale for most laws was to prop themselves up and give them power and authority over others. Jesus uses Israel's best known and best loved hero, King David, as a prime example. Jesus said that it didn't matter to David that he ate the consecrated bread in the temple reserved only for the high priests because his men were hungry and their need was more important than ceremonial regulations. Jesus used the same logic in the second reading this morning when he healed a man's withered hand on the Sabbath. The Pharisees, the keepers of the law, were trying to catch him in the act so they could continue to build their portfolio against him. But Jesus, in his infinite wisdom and ability to frame a question where there could only be one reasonable answer, asked, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? Which is lawful?" Well, after that, what could one say? How could one disagree with the spirit of Jesus' question? If you took the position of disagreement, then you were more concerned with leveraging the law, you see, over the welfare of others. But if you saw sense and logic to what Jesus was saying, especially in this period of Jewish history where rules ruled the day, then you were signaling your intent to listen more to the laws of love than the laws that were on the books, which were primarily for the sake of power and punishment. Jesus was upset with the Jewish law because much of the Jewish law did not make any sense to him. Jesus himself was a Jew, So he probably figured he had every right to criticize the law, especially when the law's intent was to stifle and to not surrender oneself to the law of God, whose purpose was to liberate and not suffocate. Now, when we take the conversation of the law to the secular level of the courts and the constitutions, we understand that the law, of course, is intended to create a just and civilized nation, laws that are intended to protect us from ourselves. That's why, of course, we have speed limits and we have tax enforcement, we have prohibition against theft and harm to others and so on. And we have legislatures and congresses to create systems of law that will give every citizen recourse if he or she is a victim of a transgression of another person. A land without laws, of course, as we know, can soon turn into a land of anarchy and corruption. One of our trips to the Congo, and this is not intended as a criticism of the people of the Congo, but only as a comment about the hierarchy's disregard for law, and therefore the same attitude trickles down to its citizenry. We were traveling through a roundabout in a city with a population of close to 1 million people with not one single stoplight. It was every man for himself. We caught sight of what seemed to be a police officer in an orange vest who appeared to be attempting to direct traffic. And the driver of our car stopped right in the middle of the roundabout. He rolled his window down and he said something to him in Swahili. I asked him what he said to the officer. He said, I told him that he was in the way and to get out of the street. You see what I'm talking about, this disregard for law and therefore chaos. Jesus never underestimated the secular need for the law and the benefits of civility that came with it. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Render unto God the things that are God's. But what was most important to him in the ethical and in the social sense was that each and every child of God be given the opportunity to flourish and not to be held back because of physical condition or social standing or education or the neighborhood of Palestine from which he or she came. When Jesus reached out to the blind man and to the leper and the woman caught in adultery and to the tax collector and the rest, he saw beyond what the religious law said about these people and therefore lowering that person's standing in society. And instead, Jesus saw each person as a unique gift of God, unlike the prejudice of the religious law. Those were laws without love. Jesus wanted laws with love. Jesus wanted laws with purpose. The Apostle Paul picked up this theme in the book of Galatians when he said that no religious law, Paul said, has any value. Interesting. No religious law has any value. The only thing that counts, Paul said, is faith expressing itself through love. So in developing our own religious life, we don't necessarily rely on laws to express our faith, but we rely on love to demonstrate our belief. American theologian Reinhold Niebuhr said, "Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we are saved by love." And it is the acts of love that are paramount in our faith, not the acts of religious law that stifled religious dissent and held others back in the development of their own potential and God-given talent. Now, apart from basic laws as the Ten Commandments and denominational constitutions and guidelines that provide systems that help things operate, as Presbyterians would say, in decency and in order, the Christian faith flourishes when faith and love flourish. As Jesus emphasized in his greatest commandment, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And as Paul so eloquently states in that famous 1 Corinthians 13 chapter, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but I have not love, I am nothing but a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And that's the thing about love. If you have faith in its power, you can move mountains. And it can happen quickly when you tune in swiftly to the love that is needed at that particular moment. I mentioned last week the quartet of books written by English author Malcolm Gladwell, and one of the first ones of his collection was called Blink, as I said last week. And somewhat of a sequel to the sermon last week, I like to pick up on the theme of the little human episodes that can later turn out to be great human episodes, sometimes just in a matter of a blink. And for the Christian, it evolves around that concept of love, not following the rules and regulations established by religion, but by opening up your arms and embracing those who need your love. Gladwell says in Blink that when it comes to the task of understanding ourselves and the world, I think, he said, we pay too much attention to the grand themes and too little attention to the particulars of those fleeting moments. Jesus is more concerned with the person in front of him, as an example, instead of the larger theme of faith and love, which he knew would take care of itself if enough people responded instinctively in the blink of an eye to the call of love right in front of you. Gladwell went on to say, what would happen if all of us took our instincts seriously? What if we stopped scanning the horizon, he said, with binoculars and began instead examining our own decision-making and behavior through the most powerful of microscopes? I think, he said, that would change the ways that wars are fought, the kind of movies that we get, the way couples are counseled, the way job interviews are conducted. And if we were to combine, he said, all these little changes, we would end up with a different and a better world. There can be as much value in the blink of an eye as in months of rational analysis. When you go back to the beginnings of our faith, with Jesus traveling the dusty roads of Palestine and having one encounter after another with those in need and distress, and in the blink of an eye, he changed their lives because he demonstrated that the Messiah was not about pomp and circumstances and antiquated religious law, but more about taking care of the need right in front of him. You know, at that point in history, people weren't looking for an analysis of law in some kind of white paper on how to improve it. They were looking for that blink of compassion, that blink of empathy, that blink of instinctual caring that would instinctively lead to faith and belief. And this blink, this sudden transformation of multiple lives, set the stage for the birth of a movement that would forever transform the world. We know that. Now one has to ask and understand that Jesus made a major breakthrough in his ministry in Luke 6 when he challenged the laws that were devoid of love. Why shouldn't one be able to pick wheat on the Sabbath? Why shouldn't he be able to do that if he or she is hungry? Why shouldn't one heal another person's hand on the Sabbath if one has been living with pain and paralysis all his life? Why shouldn't he be able to do that? Jesus is still telling us today that the world would be in a lot better shape and there'd be a lot more unity if everybody learned to walk a mile in the other person's shoes, and therefore love would become the byproduct. Judge David Stutzman, just a couple of days ago when he was speaking here, in his exceptional talk on justice, he alluded to the famous novel by Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. And in that novel, as many of you I'm sure have read it, in defense of the falsely accused African-American man, Tom Robinson, in the deeply bigoted, fictional Macomb County in Alabama, Atticus Finch tells the jury, "You never understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb in his skin and you walk around in it." That's what Jesus did, you see, when the disciples were hungry. That's what he did when he saw the man with the withered hand. He felt his pain. He felt their hunger. It is a law of love. It is a law of empathy for others. It is the blink of an eye that you will watch things change before your very eyes.